Hello and welcome to How to Prevail in an Age of Contested Logistics, a dispatch from INDOPAC 2024, brought to you by GDIT. I'm your host, George Jackson with GovExec TV. Sustainment and logistics are the backbone of any successful military operation. Being prepared for adversarial conditions is a must for air, land, sea, space, cyber, and information forces. As the Indo-Pacific region continues to evolve, those forces need to prevail against a contested logistics environment through data and technology, innovative approaches, and constant vigilance of global conditions. Today, you'll learn more about how cutting-edge solutions are transforming the way the Department of Defense sustains its warfighters, from AI-driven predictive analytics to digital accelerators. Joining me now, Lieutenant Colonel Ricky McArthur, Director of Logistics, Special Operations Command Pacific. Good to see you, sir.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Major General Kurt Sonntag, former Commanding General John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center, School at Fort Bragg. Always a pleasure, General.
Good to see you.
Last but not least, Frank Harrar, Director, South Growth Operations, GDIT. Frank, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Colonel, kick us off. Uninitiated audience here. Contested logistics, what does it mean? Just give us a definition right here off the top.
No, contested logistics, it's a concept of looking at the holistic supply chain, understanding its vulnerabilities, and then just building a network that is reliable and dynamic and change in order to give the warfighters what they need at the point of need.
General, you mentioned something before we got rolling here about contested logistics means different things to Special Operations Forces than it does to DoD more broadly. What did you mean by that? Who sort of needs to interpret those two definitions?
So one of the challenges within Special Operations is, by design, when we deploy, we're expected to be able to be self-sustaining for a period of time. Once that time period ends, we are dependent upon the other services, part of the joint force, to get the greater amount of supplies and resources necessary to continue our fight. In this particular case, given some of the challenges here in the Pacific, due to the distances involved, the probability that our primary means of resupply are going to be challenged by our adversary, SOF needs to rethink in terms of the length of time it's got to support itself and how it's going to support itself. In this case, because we work primarily with our partner nations, is we probably should look at becoming more resilient and dependent upon what the local economies can provide us in order to sustain our fight.
What does the phrase "the last tactical mile" mean, General, and how does it relate to contested logistics?
So last tactical mile is always where, if it's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong, because this is where there's a convergence of opportunity, both for our side within the joint force, but it's also where our adversaries can take advantage of a concentration of our forces. So we can either get to that last mile with adequate resources to accomplish the task that we've been given, or it can be significantly challenged by adversary actions and decisions. And in this case, given how far we are from our main lines of supply, we have to either carry it forward with us, which is its own challenge, or we have to have it already there. So in the past 20 years, we've had the luxury of owning the airspace, owning the maritime domain. We can move at will, and we had the ability to create these giant mountains of iron, to be able to support us. In this case, we're not going to be able to do that. So we have to think very carefully in terms of what are the effects that we're going to want our men and women to be able to accomplish, and what do they actually need so that we don't overburden an already taxed supply chain.
I'm going to introduce one more phrase here at the top, Frank, as we kind of lay the groundwork for the larger conversation. We can come back to these later, but steady state logistics. What does that mean? Why is it important?
Well, it's especially important for what Special Operations Forces do and what they're doing every day in the world right now. They're experiencing contested logistics, what we call left of bang, short of armed conflict or lot of things to prepare the environment, things they're out doing, partnering with other nations. So they're experiencing these type of logistical issues, whether that be geographic, whether that be over distance. So they've got to be able to sustain themselves and continue to sustain operations, maintain technologically advanced equipment in far forward places where we are not necessarily in conflict and there is not a lot of bigger Department of Defense presence in those areas.
The Indo-Pacific region, Colonel, is enormous. I mean, so vast. We were talking about the sheer distance even to get to this wonderful event before rolling the cameras. Talk about the sort of space implications and why it's so different for your part of the DoD.
Yeah, so the distance in INDOPACOM is a huge distribution challenge. And we talk about, you talk about flying, let's say flying from the West Coast over to Japan. That's a 10, 11 hour flight just for one aircraft. Then that crew has to reset just to, go back and fly again. And there's only so many aircraft, so we talk about like doing any type of resupply. It's a limited asset. When you talk about, getting the warfighter supplies the point need, a standard commercial vessel, 10-day sail time from the West Coast over, to most of the countries inside the Pacific. And so as we look at distribution in the Pacific, it's really managing, how do we prioritize, what do we need to stage forward to be there for the point of need, and what can we, push from it. Huge challenge right now, really, with just the distance and time and travel to push it.
Before we start digging into logistics more specifically, General, I hearken back to the opening keynote that we just heard from Vice Admiral Blake Converse, Deputy Commander, U.S. Pacific Fleet, and I wrote down something he said: we have to massively upgrade our command and control capabilities. He said this is probably the biggest challenge they face. Is that because of the distance itself? Is it other things?
So distance, in this case, is closed by robust communications networks. So we're very reliant upon satellite communications. So really what this comes down to is, do we have the right data transport nodes to be able to move the large amounts of data and information back into a system that can readily assimilate it and define what it means to the decision maker. When you have dispersed forces across, millions of square miles of ocean and islands, it's all got to aggregate someplace in order to provide the chain of command a proper picture of what's happening. And then when you look at the sheer volume of different types of supply, and all that's encoded into some type of data set that comes back, that's just increases lag time on the ability to communicate, and just overburdens particularly the servers we got now to be able to handle what's going on. And then the other challenge with this is, as we forward position as much supply as possible, they themselves become its own target. And it's very predictable from an adversary standpoint, because we're predictable as a nation, particularly the military. We like to be regimented in our approach. So how do we put unpredictability into our supply management and distribution in order to safeguard our logistics?
Colonel, it looked like something stood out there to you, did it? Something you want to build on from the General's remarks?
No. I think it's the decision-making cycle. Having the ability to communicate and understand where resources are, where the logistics is. It helps the forward logisticians at the last tactical mile fix their OODA loop cycle, the decision-making cycle on, how do we employ our resources? How do we dynamically shift it to the point of need to help, win the mission?
Frank, I've been talking a lot about distance so far, but contested logistics isn't just distance. These types of environments are, severe weather-oriented events. I'm sure there are others. What types of situations does the military have to encounter where contested logistics is an issue?
You've mentioned geography and distance. It can be terrain in some of the remote areas where special operations forces are working. Political conditions, and political conditions are ever changing. So the partner you could rely on a year ago to help you forward stage equipment or to allow you to use their transportation networks, that may change in the current day just because of their own domestic or regional concerns. So it's ever changing as far as the geopolitical situation goes. Also our own policies toward other countries and who we happen to be partnered with and where we have access and where we don't because of those conditions. It could be either natural or man-made disasters. Thinking about the volcanoes in Iceland in 2010, 2011 that shut down commercial air transport for weeks and weeks just because of the disturbance that caused. It could be, talking about the political again, when we operated in Afghanistan. On occasion, Pakistan would shut down land routes into Afghanistan just based on changing conditions, policy conditions.
When he says the word political, General, I think most of like a mainstream TV audience is going to go straight toward U.S. or domestic politics, but what we're really talking about is local environments.
Right.
In bases or contested areas. Am I reading that right, sir?
Yeah, so, and I wanted to, kind of highlight one of the things that Frank was talking about regards to the political environment that you're dealing with across a variety of different nations. They have their own goals and objectives, their own attitudes towards our adversary, towards our Western alliance, and you have to understand that in order to better protect your logistical capabilities. For instance, as from a DoD perspective, if we're going to warehouse in a country, there's all these agreements are going to take place through the State Department with the host nation, down through the business community. But are we doing due diligence to make sure that we understand, well, who actually is going to manage the warehousing facility for us? Who is the labor force? What are their allegiance to? Who's providing security? Who's running the IT for that facility? What's its vulnerabilities? Can it be exploited by someone inside that environment that then affects our ability to either move those supplies, distribute it appropriately, et cetera. So it's not just one. Now we're talking dozens, hundreds of different smaller sets and sites. That becomes very, very challenging, particularly within DoD when we have limited resources to be able to do the due diligence to the scope and scale that's necessary to safeguard our men and women.
Colonel, let's step back from the political dynamic we've been discussing. The General mentions warehouses. What does the future of storage look like for those contested environments?
Yeah, so warehousing, super critical, especially we talk about pre-positioning, or rather, our requirements pre-positioning for exercises, any type of events that we're going to. Warehousing is critical, and we talk about contested logistics, distribution, heavily contested. What happens if the ship that was supposed to leave gets frustrated? There has to be a ability to surge storage for frustrated cargo. That way you can reprioritize and move it, but you also don't want to just leave critical supplies out in the elements. It needs to be protected. That way it can be, it's still a valid, resource during the time of need.
What does data have to do with that, Frank? These days or in the future, I mean, you got to get those supplies to the soldier at their time of need. How is data infusing those efforts?
I think it's incredibly helpful to get to what a lot of people refer to as precision logistics. Reduce that forward footprint, that need to warehouse, reduce that as much as possible or optimize it based on what the data is telling you. Maybe you don't need to forward stage 150 or 250 of these repair parts because you only need to replace them once a month. So it's lower demand. So data can inform you, using the data properly can inform you on what you need forward, because a big piece in mitigating the effects of contested logistics is minimizing what you have to put forward.
Yeah.
So if I may, I think one of the other things that data can do, particularly if you got the right AI algorithms against that, is you can develop your own self-healing logistics by understanding when something in the chain gets disrupted, what are the next pathways to rapidly repair that segment in order to continue the operation.
Has that been part of your experimentation, Colonel, with artificial intelligence, the more effective use of data and analytics to make that much more seamless going forward?
Definitely, like taking a look at, how do we see problems? How do we see trends? So as we talk about like the maintenance piece, all right, what repair parts do we need to store? But we can also use it to see, all right, what breaks first? What breaks second? Okay, if we can repair this item first, it can save us costs down the road. It can, really troubleshoot and get equipment back into the fight a lot faster by, using, AI to help us understand those trends.
Frank, go right ahead.
Sorry, I'd like to touch on that maintenance piece again, because it's not just the repair parts, but it's the maintainers. It's how do we reduce putting people forward? We can use technology to reduce the number of people we put forward, because you put more people forward, that's more people to feed, more people to sustain, you need more real estate. Through remote maintenance, where you can have field service reps or you can have the experts back in a CONUS location, and either through virtual reality or a lot of the other technology we have, the service members who are forward they might not be the experts, but they can do a lot of the maintaining and do the necessary repairs without necessarily having the technical experts there.
Like any good speaker, Frank, you took me where I was hoping to go next here, and that's teaming. Talk about teaming, why it's so important, who's involved?
Well, first of all, teaming with industry is extremely important, because of Department of Defense's reliance on industry. There are times when we would need them to ramp up production, and you've got to have those partnerships in place ahead of time, because even back in the U.S., the infrastructure, the expertise, the retooling of factories may not be there to ramp up production as quickly as we would need it. Teaming with the transportation industry is extremely important. They've got the relationships internationally, they've got the experience, they understand what works and what doesn't, and we'll rely heavily on them for their transportation networks. And as the General mentioned earlier, partner nations, the huge role they play, not only in cases where we would have to procure things locally where it made sense to do that, but also their assistance in providing transportation networks and access to real estate and warehousing.
So if I may, the partnership with industry is so critical to the safeguarding of our nation, because they have the same goal in mind, all right? So it's symbiotic, all right? So industry can't, or at least U.S. industry, can't flourish the way it needs to without a safe and secure world that the Department of Defense, along with its allies and partners, provide industry, all right? So access to free markets, freedom of navigation, and trade routes, all that is necessary. So it's in their best interest, from an industry standpoint, to be tied very closely with what DoD activities are. And industry, my observations, particularly over the last few years, is they are very aggressive and proactive in being in position to best support DoD activities. They are worldwide. So DoD likes to claim we're in a whole bunch of nations. Completely different. When you're wearing a uniform in your nation, it's a different communication, right? When you're an industry and you're in 200 nations out there, and you're driving the economy for that country, you have different leverage. You have a different understanding of what is happening with supply chain, what is happening with labor force, what's the financial viability of the nation, what pressures are being exerted, from our adversaries into those, quote, friendly or neutral nations. So they have their ability to actually provide information, access, placement, and support is unmatched, way beyond what we can actually do as a government.
What does your office rely on from a teaming perspective internal to DoD? You know, at the service level, at the joint level, like what does teaming look like internally?
Yeah, well, I'll use an example. Super simple. Distance is a problem. So we may need to fly, a part to forward in the Pacific. What is cheaper? Paying for the whole plane or paying for one pallet, and then the Marines have a pallet, the Air Force has a pallet, Navy has a pallet. So by teaming up with each other, we can come up with cost-effective solutions to go forward and meet the requirement. Another example is, we may have this niche maintenance part that needs to be created, but the Navy forward may have a additive manufacturing capability where we can send them the data file and then they can print the part for us that we can use temporarily until the right part can get ordered, go through the supply chain and meet forward. So understanding the capabilities of the other services and our industrial partners on what can we leverage, and teaming up both inter-service or with partners is critical. Again, the contested logistics piece is how do we get the warfighter the supplies they need at the point of time of need to accomplish the mission, dealing with distribution, dealing with supply chain issues, everything else.
Frank, you referenced earlier being forward staged. We really didn't get a chance to dig into that, but why is being forward staged so important, and how does an organization do it effectively?
Number one, it reduces time of delivery in time of need. It reduces a lot of the risks involved with moving men, material, or even data over long distances. Speeds up your delivery, reduces risk, and makes that material available when needed.
Sounds like the gold standard to me. That's exceptionally hard to do in the Indo-Pacific. Am I reading that right?
That is exceptionally hard. And again, it's when you talk about distribution and assets, how do you prioritize? If we don't pre-position it, now we have to compare, what is the priority moving, and things get delayed or pushed or shifted. Having the critical supplies pre-positioned enables us to prioritize the right equipment and get it pushed forward and use our limited assets effectively and efficiently.
Well, General, we've covered a ton of ground, and I'm not making a pun relative to distance with that comment, but what did we miss, sir? Kick off a round robin for us. What did we miss?
So really the discussion here is how do we mitigate risk? This is the commander's largest challenge at all times. We're never going to have everything that we want. And then when you distribute forces across an area of operation the size of Indo-Pacific, right, you're going to have to assume risk. And usually a commander mitigates that risk by the application of resources against his priorities. And so again, we look at the breadth. You either have the resources forward so you can make those decisions quickly and timely, or you've got to be able to push resources from back here all the way across and assume a lot of risk, and then you work dealing with time on the backside. So how do you close all that, inform the commander? So AI has a role in it, pre-positioning of supplies, redundant, resilient, self-healing supply chains. They're important. Reliance upon the indigenous population, indigenous resources, forward-based additive manufacturing for things that, hey, it's better to produce it forward than to fly at 6,000 miles and might not get there. All those things help mitigate risk for the commander. That is the most important thing, because it enables him then to focus where he needs to focus.
Frank, what did we miss? What do you want to foot stomp?
Contested logistics is not a new thing. Logistics have been contested as long as there's been warfare. What's different about today's world, or what not necessarily different but ever changing, is how interconnected all of our supply chains and transportation systems are, and how reliant on data and technology they are. And that, while that improves and speeds up these systems, it also makes them more vulnerable. And it presents a lot more areas where our adversaries can get at us and disrupt those supply chains or disrupt those transportation networks. So while we have greatly enabled logistical capabilities based on technology, our use of data analytics, predictive analytics that can tell us what we need, where we need it, and how to get it there, again, it presents other vulnerabilities, it presents other risks, and tells our adversaries these are ways you can help prevent us from getting what we need to where we need it.
Colonel, I asked you to kick off this conversation. Why don't you just tie a bow on it, sir?
Okay, I'm just the last comment is contested logistics has to be practiced. And we talk about, it's a resilient supply chain where there's vulnerabilities. Practice doing new things. Practice using a different carrier. Practice using a different port. Practice, different temporary warehousing. Understand the local policies, local regulations, and find out what works. Like it's great for us in the military, it's great for business, where if there's a hurricane, you already have a plan that's rehearsed, that's been practiced. So with contested logistics, you just got to keep practicing it to get good at it.
Lieutenant Colonel Ricky McArthur, Director of Logistics, Special Operations Command Pacific, Major General Kurt Sonntag, former Commanding General John F. Kennedy, Special Warfare Center, the school at Fort Bragg, Frank Harrar, Director, Soft Growth Operations, GDIT. Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, George. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And thank you, our audience, for tuning in. A big thanks to AFCEA for hosting another great event, and to GDIT for making programs like this one possible. I hope you walk away from today's conversations with a few notes about what contested logistics is, why teaming is so important, and the role technology plays in the future of sustainment. If you enjoyed this topic and want to learn more about the forces shaping military operations in the Indo-Pacific, check out our companion program, Prevail at the Tactical Edge, through mission partner environments. Watch it now at govexec.com/events. For GovExec TV on assignment in Honolulu, Hawaii, I'm George Jackson. Aloha.
Dominance on the modern battlefield requires interoperability with global mission partners. The strength of the coalition is what will ensure the security of our nation and partner nations well into the future. For decades, GDIT has led DoD's most complex mission partner environment challenges. Our experience has enabled critical capabilities in peacetime and in conflict. And the mission is dynamic, requiring sharing at the speed of operations. At GDIT, we deliver strategic and tactical solutions that harness zero trust to enable the future of warfighting, spanning network and data-centric capabilities at all levels of classification, and ranging from the most stable to the most austere environments at the tactical edge. The future of MPE is responsive, adapting to evolving requirements, secure, and available when our warfighters need it most. GDIT, secure collaboration on a global scale.